Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show, we're talking about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Season 1, Episode 2 of The Midnight Club. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. But first and foremost, obviously, we spend a little bit more time with Anya in this particular episode. We'll kind of get even more of a display of her and her personality, and especially when that kind of comes in conflict with Ilanka. Ilanka's just like making these teas, but you could tell it's irking Anya's nerves, and Ilanka doesn't get why it bothers her so much, but basically during group therapy she kind of rips into Ilanka because it's like, tell him about this tea that has these antioxidants and stuff like that, because for her it's like she's tired of having one of my roommates had garlic on their breath, and it's like, fine, that was better than all the stuff you're doing, because for her it's like, you're trying to do all this stuff like these, trying to come here with like any attempt to find a cure for herself. We're all dead, you still trying to find a cure, trying to find some cure or whatever. It's more spit in the face, at least the way Anya kind of treats it. It's like, you are being so sacrilegious to everything that this is. We are all here because we know we were going to die. There's no changing that. All the purpose is to make it as easy as possible, us going out our own terms. And it's harder just to go through death when I have you still clinging on to hope, this belief, and you're even trying to have this conversation with me about it. And so she really, really, really leans into Ilanka. But during the session, Dr. Stanton points out, right, Anya, you were like that at one point in time. And two, you came here with all your particular, little things that you wanted to try, your remedies and stuff like that. Apparently, she used to, wear makeup and also wear a wig from time to time, as the others talk about it. But Dr. Stant was trying to make it seem like you're jumping down her throat, but you were just like that. Everyone comes here still probably clinging to some version of hope. So what Ilanka's doing isn't that crazy, but it's like, oh, and she's like, right, I get it. That's a no on the tea, but a maybe on the piss, because she made that whole urine therapy, which the subtitle for that was messed up. Instead of the urine like piss, it said you're in. So that's why I had to rewind. I'm like, what? I was like, oh, okay, it's that subtitle error in that regard. I thought that was interesting. Either way. And when she kind of bit back, Anya was almost kind of taken back by, you see Kevin and Spence kind of chuckle to themselves. But I don't know whether Anya's just not used to people because she's kind of always, I think, dominating any back and forth she has with anybody. So Ilanka kind of it's I guess most new people don't bite back, and she bit Ilanka snapped back, and I guess it kind of took Anya back a second. But when they got back to the rooms, Ilanka was throwing out all the herbal stuff, and she's like, I get it. You might be pissed at me. Right, you've had it tougher than everyone else. You're going to die harder than everyone. She's like, well, bingo, you got it. And it's like, well, I'm sorry. Fuck me for wanting to get to know you. That's all I wanted to do. And Anya kind of felt bad. But it was the thing of, yeah, she was just lashing out. Ilanka just happened to be the focus of her ire. But it's I think it's just, once again, it's how Anya compensates with everything. It's she's angry at the world, and she has every right to be, and so she comes off sarcastic, she comes off mean, and I think that's just her way of dealing with everything. And once again, everyone just has their own process, their own way of dealing with grief. Because this particular therapy session, and maybe they have it every so often, maybe it happens in every therapy session, or maybe it's just this particular session, they were talking about the thing you were going to grieve. And Amish, he was grieving the game systems he won't be able to play. He's like, yeah, I'm an Atari kid. I think he said NES, Genesis, Super Nintendo. He's like, the next one coming up is a PlayStation. Sadly, it's not going to be out for 8 months. And he probably feels like, yeah, his time frame isn't within that 8 months. Is it, before that 8 months comes around? And he's like, yeah, the N64. He's like, because video games is something he really loves. And for him, it's like, I'm not going to be able to play every system. And that sucks. And he's like, I know it probably sounds kind of lame, but Dr. Stanton says, when it comes to the things that you're grieving, whether it's something that you've lost in the past, something you won't even be able to do in the future, there is no such thing as a lame answer, because your grief is your grief. No one can judge you in that regard of what it is that you want and what you're longing for. So I think that's just kind of a neat parallel you can make with Anya. Like, this is just her way of grieving and dealing with it. We found out about Spence's circumstances, like when he cut his hand and freaked out, because like the moment like he was cutting the paper, I was like, and he wasn't looking, I'm like, he about to cut himself. I'm like, this is about to get bad, isn't it? And it's a pretty deep cut. Blood gets on Anya, and he starts freaking out, and he's worried. He's like, I'm sorry. I'm like, what was that about? Like, I was like, does he have I was like, well, if he had a phobia of blood or something, he would have passed out. He wouldn't just like but it's like, we find out that he has AIDS, and the moment Anya dropped, or I think Kevin might have said something, and in that moment, Ilanka's face had a natural reaction of finding that out, and then Anya ripped into her for that, because it's like, oh, like, you looking at him like that, we get enough of that on the outside. This isn't a place for you to come and share your pity. We're all in this thing together. We're all going to die. It's just a sucky situation it is, but we don't have that, like, those eyes of pity or feeling sorry, you know, because it's like, right, when we have cancer and stuff like that, it's just such a natural instinct for people to just be like, oh man, because cancer is just such a natural thing. But especially in this time, because I didn't even think about that. Like, because when I think of the AIDS situation, I think 80s, but I'm sure I'm sure that permeated a lot probably in the 90s, maybe even the early 2000s. Like, obviously the conversation about AIDS and like HIV and stuff like that, like those, that type of stuff isn't, the same conversation isn't had. You know, like that conversation's changed so much over the years. And so, but because I think Ilanka probably did just kind of like, oh man, I'm poor. Like, she probably had an instinct reaction of like, oh, poor Spence. But she didn't think like, oh, I didn't mean anything by it. And it's like, it's okay. Like, the thing is, Anya might be a little mean. She said all that, she ripped into you like that. But truth be told, she gets very protective of us all. So it is this caring thing too of like, right, I don't want you to make you know, anyone feel less than or worse or bad about their circumstances. Like, no one here needs your pity. We're all on the same playing field. His situation may be AIDS, but it's no different than our situation with cancer. The problem is people on the outside are going to look at him differently, and we don't do that bullshit here. We look at each other we're all on the same playing field, or we're dying, you know? So Ilanka just felt like she kept doing things wrong, but it's like Kevin's like, no, she can be very mean, but at the end of the day, she does try to protect us. And once you get to know her, she's okay to a good person. So she's in that range of okay to good if you get her to really kind of thaw out, you know, a little bit. And Mark and the moment like Mark was talking about essentially Interview with the Vampire, I was like, wait, what? That timing's so interesting. Well, because if you don't know, Interview with the Vampire has been adapted into a show that's currently airing on AMC. And the reason why I said that particular conversation too, I'm sure it didn't come up like when this originally came out, because I'm watching this like a week or two later. I mean this as in Midnight Club. But the fact is, he references Lestat and the whole Louis thing about Louis wanting to eat rats. Lestat's like, oh, eat a person? I'm like, that's so wild, because that's public, like, on AMC, because obviously the show's also on AMC Plus, where, like, episodes come out, like, a week early. The fact is, the most recent AMC episode is, episode 3, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And that's the episode where that whole aspect of it comes up, because obviously it's 94. And so it's like, oh yeah, the movie came out. So it's like, oh yeah. And so he's like telling him plot points about, which is so crazy, because I mean, I guess it's just like the perfect lineup of stuff like that, just like happenstance. But it's like the whole like, oh, we should have a daughter type of thing. And it's like, oh, that storyline was literally introduced at the very end of this most recent episode on it. I thought that was the timing of that was just so wild. Unintentional, like I said. This is like, if I was watching this when it originally dropped, that wouldn't necessarily be the case. But still, like, I want to say the show had probably already started airing by then, maybe. Because like I said, that was like 2 weeks ago. So like the show probably, I want to say might have aired the week of this airing, or like a couple days after. Either way, doesn't matter. I'm getting so caught up in the tangent, but I do love that he's trying to make Spence feel okay. He's like, I'm wearing these gloves not because it's a misunderstanding a lot of people have. He's like, there are people with AIDS it isn't a gay thing. So I don't know whether that's implying like, well, because Spence is gay, and that just kind of vilifies him even more, you know, because once again, the way AIDS was perceived as like, oh, that's just a homosexual thing. Like, you know, it's like, oh, if you're gay, like AIDS is just a gay thing. It's not like, oh, like anyone could, get AIDS. Because once again, it's like people didn't know then what they know now. But Mark is trying to explain to him, like, you don't have to worry about, I'm wearing gloves not for you protecting me from you, but protecting me, not protecting you from me from you, but you from me. I bumbled that. Because Mark is like, I don't want to end up accidentally infecting you. So that's, and kind of using, like, Interview with the Vampire. That's why I almost wonder, is there an element of, is Spence gay? Or, like I said, it doesn't even have to be that he actually is gay. Maybe he is, and that adds extra layers to it. But even if he's not, it adds in the fact is that he probably gets judged even more. Like, oh, not only do you have AIDS, you're also gay. Just having AIDS immediately make people go like, oh, you're part of that community. So I think it could go either way, whether he's gay or not. Like the vilification of, because obviously being gay, there's nothing wrong with that, but in that time frame, and especially when people are going to tie that together with like, oh, you have AIDS too, and it just being a gay thing. So there's layers to that. But him also using Interview with the Vampire, it's like, right, there's a blood, vampire, so like there's a blood element to it. So him using that parallel was interesting. But then you also add in, and I've recently heard this from someone, I want to say it was on Black Men Beyond, Mark and Malcolm Barrett were talking about it. And so I want to say that they were saying like there were undertones of homosexuality, like, like there being a thing between Louis and Lestat, but it was never as expressed. Maybe not in the books, definitely not even in the movie, but there were undertones of it. It was never expressed to the extent it is in the TV show. So that's why I was almost wondering, like, oh, could there be an even deeper parallel there just because there were those undertones of it? But maybe it's even clearer in the book than it is in the movies. I don't know. Oh, the movie, but either way. I just thought it was just Mark doing what he could to make Spence feel better and okay. There was also, like, speaking of Spence, there was this moment when Anya kind of like vented her frustrations to him and Kevin about like, oh man, I hate that, like, she comes in here and she's just so annoying, referencing Ilanka. And then it was Kevin, it was like, you're only mad at her because a part of you wants to hurt her because she came in here telling a story about someone from this place, Julia, walking out of here cured. And there's a part of you that wants to make her hurt because there's a part of you that wanted to believe that story. And Anya doesn't have like a rebuttal to that. She was kind of left kind of speechless again. So it really kind of struck a chord with her. And I think that maybe on some level she kind of had to recognize like maybe there's some truth to that. Once again, it's just like coming in here with like these hopes of cures and stuff like that because she had that. And sometimes, hope can be a deadly weapon. It's like you want to tell someone to keep their hopes up, but sometimes hope and getting disappointed time and time again is the most crushing thing. That's why like hope can be, for some people, it could be the worst thing imaginable because it's like giving me hope means that I can gain something. I'm holding on to hope, but the moment it shatters, it can break you into a million pieces. And then she had that scene with Dr. Staten where she's, Dr. Statten's kind of like, right, I know someone at this place that's kind of more like me. She's like, oh, Alanka. And she telling Anya, it was like, no, you remind me a lot of me, just tougher because it's like, right, you're stubborn. And because she was referencing her son, which she brought up in episode 1, who died, Julian? And there's also, there's the watch or whatever it was that Ilanka found, that necklace in the drawer. It belonged to Rachel. And it's like, no, let's give it to Rachel's mom because she'll need something to remember her. I have all these memories of Rachel. Like the way she kind of callously talks about Rachel made it seem like, oh, she was just kind of like, yeah, whatever, wackadoo Rachel. But it's like, oh, she legitimately does care. It's just I think putting your heart on your sleeve makes it just easier. So it's just like she'd rather bury all that. But I think it's also because, once again, she's very protective of all the people around her. So, and even, once again, I want to say it was Kevin who was referencing, like, yeah, she's seen a lot of death, not even just here at this facility at Brightcliff, but also probably most likely before she even got here too. So she does get a little protective of people in their circumstances, and like so much death surround you would kind of make you probably like a little angry, a little jaded, understandably so. But I also forgot to talk about Dr. Stanton Alonka asked her about Julia, and you saw her kind of perk up. I was like, oh no, who was that? Oh, she got killed. Yeah, that was like back in 68. Oh god, that was so long ago. I barely remembered. Like, it struck a chord with her. And there was also something else that Alonka brought up too. Oh, she was referencing, was it the Paragons or something like that? It was like a cult that existed here. And she was almost like, oh, what is that? You could tell it all struck a chord with Dr. Staten. So there's something there. But during that scene where Anya is, Dr. Staten just left the scene and that shadow bit, I had to rewind it to see when exactly the shadow appeared on the wall. It's exactly when the camera, like, Dr. Staten leaves and then it turns back to Anya and then it cuts back to the door to show you the shadow. That's when it first pops up. I mean, I don't know whether it's just my mind playing tricks on me, but like I feel like if you look at that wall enough, because a lot of times it's kind of darkly lit and shadowed that you can't see the shadow form. But there are other moments where I feel like, is that something moving on the wall, or is that just my imagination, or I'm reading too much into that? Then like she had that scene where like the shadows kind of took on a dark version of herself. Once again, kind of felt like something straight out of Kingdom Hearts with the whole like, oh yeah, like Riku, spoilers, Riku made like a shadow version of Sora, which I mean the shadow version of himself kind of comes up from time to time. I mean it looks like his anti or his heartless form, his anti form, or rage form, that the heartless looking form of his that he has in like some of the future games like 2 and 3. Either way, it kind of reminded me of something like it, and especially when the eyes glowed red, and it freaked Anya out, because it's like, okay, how much is just me seeing this? How much of this is in my head? Some other interesting stuff. We'll circle back to the Anya stuff really quick, because I want to get it while it's in my head. Natsuki, so other than the main crew we've seen, there is at least one other person here. What's her name? Teresa. She was a person Natsuki was reading to, and so I guess like her conditions are like really, really bad, so she probably doesn't get to leave her room much or leave like bed, because Mark was like handling stuff for her, and Natsuki was like, oh, could you hold her, like squeeze her hand for me or something. I guess it's like you can't get too close because you probably has like a very weakened immune system type of, it's compromised. So if anyone outside of that got too close, it could, her situation being what it is, probably because like we could probably like ultimately end up hurting each other in the long run. But I thought that was interesting because I don't think she was introduced the last episode, so we just kind of got that one scene there. And then we also got introduced to was it Shasta? And at first it took me a second. I was like, wait, isn't that? And it's like, I believe that's the actress who played, because I couldn't remember her name until now. I believe it's Beverly from Midnight Mass. Because I think like Mike Flanagan is one of those people who, when he works with someone and as an opportunity comes up, like obviously he wants to like work with you time and time again. Like like for example, using Raul for example, he didn't work like Midnight Mass. I didn't see it, but I know Raul was in Bly Manor before, obviously, and Dan was in Midnight Mass, and then there's like Mike Flanagan's next project, he's also in that well. So it's like, right, when he finds people he likes to work with and the situation calls for it, like he probably feels like, oh, like here's someone I'm familiar with, I know would be good for her. But I'm fairly certain that's Beverly, which I'm like, huh. It's an interesting contrast when you think about her character from Midnight Mass. That she's kind of almost, I don't know if hippie-ish would be the right word, but she is very like believing in like the energies and like, oh yeah, like this is a healing place and stuff like that. She references like the waters and even Ilanka's name being like basically light. So I was like, oh, she's obviously it's like, oh, just because like in my head, I was like, oh, like I hope you don't have a twist where you end up being like Beverly or something. And it seems like Beverly was Beverly in Midnight Mass, but you were your own character, but still it was just kind of interesting. Granted, that character does seem super suspicious just from this rip. Just from get-go, it just seems a little like, I don't know, especially because she made a whole point about like, oh yeah, this is all kind of Dr. Staten's land. She kind of doesn't like trespassers, but it's like, right, as far as like this water, like this spring water kind of goes, it's kind of like, yeah, like you could make an argument about where exactly on this path is considered trespassing. That was a whole thing, so... But apparently none of the other kids I've ever heard of Shasta is like, oh, like, what's up with that? So. But it's Anya's turn to tell a story, and I really, really like the two Donna stories. And once again, I think it is so interesting how they go about implementing, once again, like not only like the person telling the story, implementing themselves in the story, but also, and obviously using other people, because in her story of, the two Donnas, who did she make the devil? Which the devil had the red eyes, just like the shadowy version of herself she saw. So it's this interesting thing where they, obviously it's like taking what you know, morphing it into a story, and she took that scary thing encounter she had her like at a little before like the Midnight Club's meeting in this episode. Like she ended up taking that shadowy figure's red eyes and giving it to the devil in this episode, which the devil is played by is represented by Dr. Stanton, because Dr. Stanton said her and Anya, they were like a little similar. So it's almost like the devil coming to kind of give you what you want and answering your what is it that you desire. So it's like, it's interesting that you would put Stanton in that position. So I think that's kind of interesting. I do also love, like, Lucifer's the first time I've ever really heard that whole thing about, like, right, that Lucifer, the devil, doesn't lie. You know, you can trust me. It's like, I'm not here to kind of bargain with your soul, or your soul isn't a price or everything. We'll get to that in a second. But I think, like, Lucifer's the first thing I ever saw that really leaned into that notion of, like, the devil doesn't lie. You know, because the whole thing is, like, what is he supposed to be? He is the prince of lies and stuff like that, right? So I just think that's kind of interesting. Either way. In this particular story, she is this ballerina, and part of me is like, how much of this is true and how much isn't? Because I mean, some of it seems like it is just like a straight up no, we're just like taking stuff from aspects of who we are to some extent and magnifying them for the story and, you know, kind of changing things up. But it's like, I don't know how much of that is true to Anya, like the whole, like, you know, because obviously she was talking about, like, obviously pulling from, like, where she legitimately is from and stuff. But, like, the ballerina thing and her parents wanting her to be perfect, who knows? But, like I said, the two Donna stories of, also, like, ballerina, like, her feet being messed up the way they are, you're like, oh, God. Like, when you look at, like, I think the same thing kind of applies to someone, and do correct me if I'm wrong, someone who does track, you know, kind of, like, jacks your feet up, too. Maybe that's like, I've heard that from like one person, and I don't like, they're like, oh yeah, my feet are kind of jacked up from tracking it. I don't know if that's applicable all across the board, but I know like the whole like ballet and like the way her feet looked, I was like, oh God, like not like, oh that's disgusting. It's just almost like like your feet, they look so bruised up, and you're just like, it feels like they could like fall off at any point in time, like how damaged and bruised they look. That's what it more so is. Either way, she's always trying to be the perfect person, and that's kind of what her family and everyone expects of her, but she never had those expectations. She just wanted to live a normal life, so the devil offered her an opportunity. Cool, you're going to share, you're going to live as two different people, two versions of yourself at the same time. It's like, we're going to make a copy, and you're going to share the thoughts. It's almost like you're coexisting as this person at the same time. And so I love that they didn't even really make any arrangements, because it's like, all right, Dana number 2 gets to be the one that goes out to the rave and parties. And I do love that Dana back at home doing her homework, just kind of dancing and moving to the music. It's just like, oh, that's so wild. And it seems so fun. And then the awkwardness of, like losing her virginity, and like, while her other version of herself is losing her virginity while she's stuck in between watching TV with her parents. I was like, Jesus Christ, that is super awkward. That's awkward. And she's like, like she's having an orgasm. And you're like, oh God, that's the most awkward thing ever. That's super awkward. That's so weird and wild, dude. That might be the most uncomfortable thing in this show so far. I was like, oh God, that makes me feel so weird. But sadly, things kind of spiral out from there, because Dana number 2 goes off with this musician and kind of moves away with him, I guess, kind of living her own life, partying it up and stuff like that, because they share experiences and memories and stuff like that. What one feels, the other one feels as well. But problem is, Dana number 2 starts getting addicted to some hardcore shit. At the same time, Dana Prime is trying to do her ballet thing. Like, okay, this is important. I can't fuck this up. And it ends up with her kind of messing up and breaking her ankle. And you're just like, oh, Jesus. And so I guess because the other, Dana could either block it out just because it's like she numbed herself because of the drugs. So, because we did see at one point she was kind of stepping and like, ends up like her leg ends up, I guess it was almost like her like ankle hurt too, so she was kind of stumbling a little bit. But I guess like she was so high at the time, she was numbing the pain, because it's more so like it's more of a feeling. It's not like it actually it's not a one for one of like, oh, if one has a broken finger, the other one does too. It feels like you have a broken finger, but the energy, I guess it's like once the pain subsides, it just goes away. It's not like you have that constantly. At least that's my understanding of it. And once again, things kind of spiraling from there, because Dana, like Prime, has no one else she can talk to about this. So even her best friend's like, what's going on here? And, she eventually gets to the point she starts cutting herself just to make a point, because Dana number 2 won't listen to her, won't get in contact. It's like, oh, you want to cut yourself and hurt yourself just to hurt me and get my attention? Well, how about I play this game back? So it was a stalemate. But the problem is, like, things got worse for both. Dana number 2, once again, continued to get addicted to stuff. It's living on the street. Dana number 1 is getting sent to rehab, because it's like, they recognize the signs of like, oh, you got to be on drugs, even though she's not actually on drugs. And so she kind of goes along with it, and just everything's falling apart, And when it's all said and done, both Danas get the idea of like, well, who came up with it first? It's like, well, you thought of it first. It's like, well, no, you gave me the thought of, So it's like, right, I'm the real Dana. It's like, no, I'm the real Dana. And it ends up in a who's going to shoot who first. And we don't know which Dana went to hell and which Dana survived. And it's like, oh, which Dana are you? She's like, I don't even know anymore at this point. And like, once again, her leg is missing, just like Anya's is. So applying your real life circumstances to the character. And I love, like, once again, the devil's always got their tricks. It's almost like lies of omission should be counted. But it's like, oh, I don't need to actually get your soul. The fact is that I didn't do this to you. I didn't screw you over. This is who you want it to be, and I gave you exactly what you wanted. It's like, that's why she's like, I don't have to like offer your souls, like you were like souls are lined up around the corner without even trying, type of situation. So, and it kind of ends, and it's like, you're very like, oh, one Dana is in hell and the other one's here alive, being able to feel every second. Because it's like, no matter how much she called to the devil would never come back. And because the devil would only come visit her in her dreams, that's kind of about it. Like, there was no fixing this, because the devil's like, yeah, even if I wanted to, I couldn't. So I'm like, all these stories are going to have like fucked up endings like that, aren't they? Like I said, I brought this up last episode. I am really interested in the what the breakdown of like how much is going to be outside of the Midnight Club stories, like this episode. I would say about what, maybe, I don't know if it'd be even half and half. It's probably like maybe a third to, I don't know what the breakdown of like how much of the episode was actually spent on like into Dana's story versus not. I'd probably say like, I'd say maybe half of the, the episode is kind of like that. And like I said, I'm curious to see how that split ends up playing out going forward in the show. But so other than that, you had Ilanka breaking into Dr. Stanton's office, which I love, that the whole like awkward back and forth with Kevin. He was like, well, I saw you take the wrong turn, like you weren't going back to the door. And she's like, that was like a year ago. And he was like, well, yeah, but you were kind of far away, and I don't want to get loud because I don't want to wake anyone else up. But then you were kind of too far away, so I figured I'd just follow you. But then I didn't, like, I've been following you for too long to actually say anything. So I love the awkwardness of it. And Ilanka trying to do the movie thing of using like a credit card, well, in this case, a library card, to try and open like a locked door. But it's like, Dr. Stanton kind of isn't suspicious of us, so, and Twisted nods. It's like, yeah, she trusts us. And it's like, that should actually make you feel that much more guilty about what you did. I really like the back and forth of Kevin and Ilanka, and it's really cute. But Ilanka was able to get the files, but then afterwards she's in this weird sequence where like there's this like the Bright Cliff shifts into like this old-timey place. And this ghost lady is like approaching her, and now I think Ilanka can't tell. Wait, she's like, what the fuck was that? Was that real? Was that not? Was like I sleepwalking or what? Because just at the beginning, it's like an interesting cap off to the episode, considering like the opening to the episode was Anya being in a situation like waking up screaming because of a nightmare, and interesting enough how it ended up being her story this episode. So maybe that's what motivated her to tell her story like during the Midnight Club, because maybe that nightmare had some association with what she's going through or been through. So I am very, very interested to ultimately see where the next episode takes us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, love life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.